Okay. Yeah, thanks for coming. And this is, I should probably admit, slightly hastily put together because as some of you might know, there was a QuPath workshop in San Diego last week. And what happens every time that there is a QuPath workshop is I never want to talk about the old stuff. So I try to make a new release. And then didn't quite manage a full release this time. So we're at the released candidate kind of stage, which is a way of saying, we think it's ready, but we'd like to make it available, like the new version of QuPath available for people for sort of testing and exploring and giving feedback before we make the full release. Because when we make the full release, then that's when the update notifications pop up on lots of people's screens. And then it's a bit too late if we discover there's something majorly wrong then that we didn't spot. So there was a release candidate made on the Friday afternoon before I flew to San Diego on Saturday morning. And then last week was the workshop at the whole time. No really major bugs turned up, I think, but there's been a few things turned up that I've been working on and fixing this morning. So the next new released candidate should be within the next couple of days. But I figured probably better to do it after this, because this is mostly going to be a live demo, so presumably things are not going to work. And so I'll also try and fix whatever goes wrong within the next 30 minutes. But basically that's where we are. And I figured because of the fantastic halfway to I2K thing, it was a good chance to really just give a demo. So last week I gave a kind of a full presentation and stuff. That will be on YouTube anyway. And so I didn't really want to repeat all of that. So in this case, I just want to chat about the stuff that we've been working on, the things that are in the new version of the software, and perhaps if you can, ask questions if you like, then it's a chance of kind of a informal sort of discussion. One thing that I should say is that for research group, multiple people are working on this. Here you can see some of them. And so I will refer to some of these names throughout the talk for whenever we're describing parts that they've worked on. And so, yeah, you can check out the research group. And also if you're active on the forum, you may see some names of the people involved now as well, contributing to different parts of QuPath. Okay. And I am perfectly happy to be interrupted with questions at any moment. The only thing is I'm not terribly good at managing that and screen sharing and remembering what I'm doing at the same time. And so, yeah, I might need somebody to tell me if there is a question that I have missed. Okay, so the big challenge of QuPath at the moment. So we are 0.44 is the current stable release, but 0.5 is coming very, very soon. And this is going to be the second release candidate within the next day or two. And that's what the version that I'm going to show you. The big challenge for QuPath is that there's a lot of users now. And we have long-term funding, which is exciting. But the challenge is that we need to somehow make the software do more and yet also try and simplify it. Because it's easier to make it do more by piling more features in, but then it just won't survive. It'll crumble under a mess of bugs. And so we need to try and make the software more capable and simpler. And that's the big challenge at the moment. But I also want to make it easier for people to use and to understand and to try and really make the concepts easier to follow. And so that's kind of going to be a theme, what you see here. So if you start up the new release candidate, soon to be 0.5, it should look pretty similar to the last one. We have this kind of introductory page. These are buttons, and so it can lead you to the documentation, to the discussion forum, and to the website where you can get the code. You also have the chance to switch to dark mode if you really like that kind of thing. And you can choose how often you want QuPath to check for updates, and if you don't want it to check at all. If you don't want to see this every time that you start it up, then you can untick this box, and then it won't happen. But if you don't mind it, then it might be helpful to know you can just double click anywhere and it will go away. Okay. Is there any way that I can stop this? The floating meeting controls. Not sure if you could see them or if it was just me, but they were blocking where I wanted to click. Okay, so really within this presentation, I want to give you, I'm assuming that most of you probably knew QuPath because the title is What's New in 0.5. If you don't know it at all, you should get some kind of feeling for the software. But if you do know it, then I'm really going to be focusing on the stuff that's different here. So one thing that you might spot is that the toolbar is a little bit different, and we're going to see some of the buttons that are new and appeared, but this one grabs a little bit of attention because it has a little icon above it, so a little badge associated with it. And so these badges tend to indicate that QuPath has something to tell you that you may or may not care about, but it's good to know that it has the message to give you. So if I press on this one, this is a new command called context help. So this is where QuPath tries to help you a little bit with whatever you might be doing or thinking of doing at the time. And so if I move the cursor over something, if there's any kind of help or description associated with it, it does appear in these tooltips as before. So you might be able to see those at the top of the screen, but you have to let the mouse hover sometimes before they appear, and it's not obvious that they will appear. And so the context helps give you a more immediate way of unlocking this additional information. So that's so we can see if I move my mouse over something, it tells me what I can do. And so I'm hoping that that will help people to discover features that may have been there for a while. So for example, we have these tabs over at the left, and this is telling me if I right click on a tab, I can undock it into its own window. And if I close it, it'll become a tab again. And so this is something that may or may not be useful to you, but you may not have known that it was there. And so this context help is kind of helpful in pointing you in the direction of stuff. Some of it's new, some of it has been there for a while, but just is undiscovered. But one of the main purposes of it is it warns you about stuff that you might need to know about, particularly if you're new to the software. And the particular warning here is that there's no project open. Well, there's no image open, and there's no project open, and QuPath works best using projects. So I'm going to address that by creating just a new empty folder on my computer. And if I drag an empty folder on top of QuPath, so this is explaining the documentation, it will turn it into a project. So now I have a project, and that warning disappears. It's still telling me that I have no image open, but if I drag a lot of images on top, I'm going to tell QuPath that I want to import them. Then I can double click on one, and it switches to give me new information. So in this case, it's telling me that the image type is not set. But QuPath already knows that I need to set the image type, so it gives me this dialog, and I can select there, and then it's happy. So we no longer have this little warning up there because QuPath is quite happy with the state of things. We have a project, we have an image, and so it has nothing to warn us about at this point. But as I show more things here, just be on the lookout for badges that might appear, indicating that QuPath has got something to tell you that might be useful. I'm also going to turn on this input display option. So this will basically allow you to see whenever I'm pressing buttons or pressing shortcut keys by recording these down here. Okay, so I'm going to have to check my neighboring computer to find out exactly what I wanted to tell you. Okay, so we've created a project, we've opened an image, and here I've selected to open another image. One thing that you should pay attention to, if you find something incredibly annoying in QuPath, there is a reasonable chance that it has annoyed me as well, and that there is an option to get around it. So in this case, whenever you open an image and it always asks you to set the image type, the reason it does it is because it's crucial for QuPath to know the image type for some commands like cell detection. But if these are not relevant to you, or if you're happy for QuPath to automatically estimate the image type, you can select another option down here. So if you don't do stuff like cell detection, maybe you just tell, don't set the image type and don't bother me anymore. If you think that it generally does a decent job in guessing, so QuPath will try and guess based upon the color. If you've got a fluorescence or a bright field or a hematoxin and ASIN or hematoxin and DAB image, then you can tell it to auto estimate. And this is explained down in this extra part in the dialog. So I'm going to say to auto estimate because I don't want it to bother me anymore. Press apply, and then the next time I open an image, it will automatically estimate that it's a hemotoxin E as an image without bothering me. But one small thing that I want to point out here is that I'm opening these images with OpenSlide. And so OpenSlide is a fantastic open source library for working with whole slide images. And I don't know if you would have seen that within the past few days, OpenSlide 4 has been released, which is the newest version of OpenSlide, the first new release since, I don't know, about 2015 or thereabouts. And so this offers support for whole slide images in the DICOM format and lots of other improvements. And so it's so new that I haven't had a chance to explore it all myself yet. But this is going to be in QuPath 0.5, thanks to some fantastic work that Alan O'Callaghan and my group has done in order to make that possible, because I couldn't figure out how to get it integrated, but he did. And one reason why that's significant to you is if you happen to be using a recent Apple Mac computer, like I am, using Apple Silicon, that means that QuPath finally works properly in Apple Silicon, with one caveat, and that is that bioformats doesn't support Apple Silicon for a couple of file formats. CZI or CZI from Zeiss is one of the crucial ones. But most things should work perfectly well in Apple Silicon, and I see that if you're working on a recent Mac, that can improve the performance. Okay, enough about that. Once we're here, we can then start to see some of QuPath's conventional commands, like to annotate. These icons look similar to as they were before, but they have been redrawn a little bit. But if I select a command like the wands tool, that'll allow me to annotate tissue very quickly. One new toolbar button is that you can fill and unfill your annotations from the toolbar instead of having to either memorize the shortcut or go to the menus. Another new thing is that you might spot that there's a line tool here, but actually if you click on it, you're able to draw arrows, which was not something that could previously be done in QuPath. So that gives you the opportunity to draw arrows, and double arrows if you want. And so to activate that, just click on the little bit towards the bottom corner, and you can switch between lines and arrows. Whenever you do draw annotations, you're able to go under, well, you can press enter, and then it can give me a chance to set a name and some description if I want. And then under the annotations tab, you can see that information. You can see the name and you can see the description. Little trick that may or may not be of interest to you is that it supports Markdown. So you can actually have your description formatted. And so this is mostly useful in the context of teaching QuPath. And there's a fantastic extension developed in Finland called QuPath Edu, where QuPath is used in teaching, and these kind of tools are useful in that context, but they might be useful in other places as well. So yeah, the ability to draw arrows is there, annotations, filling, and so on. One other thing, which I did not practice before this, so let's hope it works, is that something that can be quite useful to do in QuPath. QuPath is widely used as an annotation tool as well as for other reasons. And I'm going to draw a few lines in here, because one of the trouble whenever you annotate an image is that sometimes you want to separate structures, but they have been annotated all as one and you need to be able to split them. And if you're using image processing, you might use a watershed transform, but you can't really do that in a whole slide image because you've got billions of pixels, and watershed transform probably won't work very well. So if I bring up the command list with Control and L, because I can never remember where things are in the menus, I can find this new command called split annotations by lines. And if I do that, it's able to split my annotations based upon any lines that I've drawn across the image. And so I can split them into different pieces. You can set a line thickness if you want to create a bit of a gap between your regions, but you don't have to. And then you can have regions which touch each other, but are still separated by the lines that you've drawn. And so this could become useful whenever QuPath is used for annotations. And it was kind of driven by a project where we needed the feature ourselves. Okay. One thing which you may or may not have spotted, because I did it briefly earlier, if I turn off the annotations so that you can't see them, this little badge appears again, because somewhat common user error at the start is that people draw annotations or detections and then they say that they can't see them anymore because they may have accidentally turned off the annotations. And so again, this context help can tell you because it can say that annotations are hidden. It can also tell you if they are hidden because this opacity slider is set down to 0. So basically this is trying to predict what could have gone wrong or what you might have missed. And it can give you these little warnings. So do check out for this if you ever get stuck on something or something is not behaving as you want, because there is a chance that it will already be able to tell you the solution to your problem. Okay. One of the other new features is that QuPath had the ability to view multiple images simultaneously before, but it was a little bit convoluted the way that you did it. Now it's a lot easier. You can create a grid, and then you can add whatever images you want within that grid. They can match viewer resolutions and these kind of features that were before, but the key thing here is that you can create grids of different sizes, and you can create arbitrary sizes by adding rows and columns, but it makes it a lot easier for you to be able to work with multiple images at the same time. And this is then also linked up with the brightness and contrast tool. So in this case, it's going to get this one wrong because the image was too dark that it didn't recognize that it was H&E. So we'll have to change the image type there. But if I do that, then if QuPath sees that we have similar images, and under the brightness and contrast tool, which has been largely rewritten, this little checkbox is selected, then we were able to adjust the brightness and contrast for all of them at the same time. Or we can select the visible channel for all of them at the same time. If this is not selected, then it's only the active viewer. So the one with a little red bar around it is the one that's being adjusted. Okay, so that might be useful if you come to work with multiple images. Something else that you can do is that you can now detach a viewer from the grid. And so if you're working on multiple screens, this may be useful to you because you can now move around a viewer independently. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be part of this grid. Oops. And what I really wanted to do here is just close the viewer. So I'll not save the changes, and then I'll set the grid size to 1 by 1, and we're back to where we started. And so working with multiple images should be a lot easier than it was in the past. But if we stick with this new brightness and contrast commands, one new feature, two new features I want to show you here, is here we have a multi-channel image. It's one of from PerkinElmer. I should move the tool over here. We can work with multi-channel images a bit more easily than before. So we have had the channel viewer that's been around for a while, so we can visualize the channels simultaneously. But if we want to control these composites that we've got, there's now a quick show all, hide all kind of button here at the top. And we can make adjustments to individual channels slightly more easily than before. But what we can also do is start to give them names. So I'm just going to save this. I'm going to create a different version. I just press save. And let's say I want to show everything and reset it. Save again. And then I'm going to press auto with everything selected. Oops. See if that. So basically, every time I save them, I got a different combination in here, so I can easily switch between them. And so that might be a useful feature in order to be able to save these kind of changes that you make. They are actually stored within the project under resources, display, and so you can even drag them and drop these files on top of other images, because it was a common problem when working with multi-channel images is just being able to save and restore your settings very easily. And so that's become a lot easier in this version of the software. Okay. Another thing that I'd like to show you, probably I should try detecting some cells here, just so we've got something to work with. We have now, one of our new toolbar buttons is for the script editor, and I will explain the significance of this button in a moment, but it may look familiar to some of you. So we have the script editor here, which can now be launched more easily from the toolbar. And we have a slightly nicer kind of autocomplete. So if I press Control and space, it's able to make some suggestions. It's not like a full autocomplete, like a real developer's code editor, but it's slightly nicer. That gives us a way of being able to get, autocomplete for some common things. So here I'm creating a script which is showing me the number of cells that I've got. This is a feature that has been there for a while, but it's a lot easier than it used to be able to do stuff like querying measurements of the cell. So I'll just grab the first cell that I can find. And this, although we're still working with Groovy is not universally loved amongst QuPath users who often want to use Python or no scripting at all. So I tried to make changes so that the syntax becomes a lot easier to read. And so if we say first cell equals cells 0, that will get the first one, and then we can just print out the measurements for it. We can get them as this kind of a map representation, so that's a nice way to query it. But what we can also then do is start to add in a new measurement. Let's just give it a random number. And probably if we do it to the first cell, I'm not going to be able to find it. So I'm just going to say for cell in cells. And I have made a mistake. I have got something wrong here because I'm still calling it first cell. But that's not too bad because it gives us a chance to show that there's another badge up here. And we will visit this in a moment to see what's happened. So whenever we've got an error, we can now see it more easily through these badges. But first I will fix my problem. It runs without complaint. And if I click on a cell, whoops, and I need to go to my measurements down here. What I'm hopefully going to find is that my new measurement is there. And so this is really, if you're working with scripts, I hope that this shows that the scripting syntax is a little bit easier to work with than it previously was. But if you don't want to script, then you can just ignore this. But what is useful to see here is this little badge is associated with another new toolbar icon, which leads us on to an entirely new log viewer created by Leo. And so QuPath log viewer previously was just like lots of lines of text, whereas now it can give you a lot more information. It can give you the time of the log message. It can, if you are working with like multi-threaded application, it can give you then the actual thread where the error occurred. It can give you the classes associated with. So all of this kind of stuff is really useful for us for debugging if you encounter a problem. So here there is an error. I can click on it, and it will show me then the full text of the error. I can copy that, and then I can go to the forum, for example. If I can find the right button, I can go to the forum and I can create a new topic in there. And I can paste the error message if I go through. I'll actually add in all of the stuff that I need here. But this little button here might look familiar because the same button is used for the script editor. So basically, this is what, whenever you post a script on the forum, I want you to press that button because it will format your text in a much more readable way. And so one of the things that when people post a problem with a script, their script is often unreadable. And then the first response that anyone gives them is, please format it as a script so that we can read it. And what you need to do is select the script and then press this button. So it's the same button to try and create a continuity in people's minds between what they should do whenever report messages. So we have this log viewer, and it has some extra nice features, like if there's warnings, just click on it and it'll lead you through them. If there's errors, it will show it to you, and I can show you the numbers of errors, unseen errors there. So that can draw attention to what you might neat to spot. Okay. Another couple of things. We have then, for example, here, we can adjust the viewer gamma. And again, that's something where QuPath thinks adjusting the viewer gamma is sometimes a little bit questionable. So it'll give you a little warning up there just to draw attention to the fact that if you switch the gamma, it'll have adjusted your view, and that's something you need to be careful with when making figures. You need to report when you've changed the gamma. And so it just draws your attention to it so you can't accidentally do it, where it makes it harder to accidentally do it without realizing. Similarly, you can create visualizations of images where the background is inverted, like a fluorescence becomes something slightly bright field looking, but it's like just a bit of a visual trick. And so again, QuPath will warn you whenever that's happening, just so you don't get confused and think that you have a bright field image. Okay. And I think I'm almost out of time here. I'm just going to mention very briefly, we have a new extension manager from Alan. And so this is a nicer way to be able to update extensions if you've got them. There are a lot of the brightness and contrast stuff was worked out with Fiona, who's focusing on the user experience within my group, and we're trying to make that a little bit nicer. Two little things that I'm going to only be able to show you incredibly briefly. But if you go to the preferences, and if I search for languages, so currently QuPath only supports English, and that remains true here, but I want to show you that we're thinking about supporting other things. It's possible to drag on. These are automatic translations of some parts of QuPath. I'm going to say to use the default, and I'm going to drag this on in a moment. We'll see why. They don't become immediately available. I need to restart QuPath in order to make them available. But whenever I do, and when QuPath finally starts up again, what you should find is we can potentially change the user interface into different languages. These are automatic translations. They might be horrible, and not everything changes. And so this is not in any way a usable feature this time, but the idea is that if you would be interested in QuPath being localized into some other language, then get in touch. We're trying to design the software in such a way as to make that possible. The other thing that I did there is I added in an extra style. So if you want to change the appearance of QuPath, you can do that now as well. And this is actually already documented online. So I'm just going to very briefly, because it's taken me longer than I expected, I'm going to very briefly go through this. And I'll open it in the script editor so you can see that I didn't actually have to write very much in order to be able to change the colors of QuPath. This is all that it takes. And that creating that little file, dragging it onto QuPath, and then restarting QuPath makes it possible to have a different theme for the software. But if you open this then in the script editor, you can also then immediately make changes to it. So the documentation gives a little bit more of an instruction as to how to do it, but you can make changes and they should automatically update. And so if the text is too small, you can make changes to this little file. If you prefer different colors, you can make changes here. And so this gives you a way to style the application to your liking. Typically, I just make it worse. But if somebody is much better at CSS than me, then they can style it in a nicer way, and potentially also share your styles with other people. Okay. So I'm out of time now. I think that was all that I wanted to say. And what I'm wondering now is, are there any questions? And how do I stop sharing my screen? Okay, I can see some questions in the chat. So one of them is, do the arrows have any new special properties, or is it just for visualization only? Yeah, just for visualization, I think. So the arrows they're basically just lines with a flag that tells QuPath draw an arrowhead at the end of this. So they don't have any special properties beyond that. I think there is a trick where you can control whether or not that annotations are filled in using a similar property trick, but yeah, so it's basically just lines with an instruction to QuPath to draw an arrowhead. Next question is there a repository of extensions that people develop and are willing to share? Not a centralized one at this time. So Alan created the extension manager incredibly short notice towards the end in a short period of time, but I think it's going to open up new and exciting possibilities. It makes it easier to install extensions and to manage them. And so I think that's going to be helpful, but we don't have a centralized kind of repository at this time. And it'd be quite hard to maintain, but it's something that certainly as extensions become more common, we're going to need to look into how to do that. Would that be a setting function for measurement exports? I think I need more information about that question, or if someone can explain it to me exactly what's meant there. I'll move on to the next one for now. Is it going to be implemented in the future version of to rescale annotations, copied or transferred from different images or images of different pixel sizes? Yeah, I made a little rigid image alignment extension once, but then other people have done better things with it and made better registration related extensions. And so, yeah, it's worth checking out on the forum the extensions that exist, like ABBA, for example, and there's QuPath extension Warpy, I think. If you only want to rescale the size of annotations, that can typically be done now with just like a one-line script. And so I've written it in the forum, but if you post a question there, hopefully we can give you that. So that's just for like rescaling or translation objects becomes really easy with a simple script, but I'm not sure how best to put it in the user interface. And one more then, is there a warning highlighted if one would oversaturate using the contrast adjustments? No, there is no warning for that at the moment. I guess could be good to do it, but because the contrast adjustments aren't actually changing any of the pixel values, I'm guessing that a lot of the time they're going to be saturated to some extent. It might be quite nice if we were able to highlight the pixels that are saturated, but we don't have that feature at the moment. And do I know whether the Apple Silicon problems with formats will be fixed anytime soon? I don't. That's a bioformats question. So they have some issues on their GitHub that discuss it, and so they're aware of the problem, but I'm not sure when it'll be fixed. The big issue for QuPath is that it needed OpenSlide and bioformats, and neither of them we had in a very Apple Silicon friendly version. But thanks to Alan's work and thanks to the new developments in OpenSlide, that's now solved. And most of bioformats will work with Apple Silicon. It's really, I only know of two formats where there's a problem. It's NDPI, but they're supported by OpenSlide anyway, so it doesn't usually matter. And ZZI or ZCI from Zeiss, and that's the one where there is no alternative to using bioformats with QuPath at the moment. And so that's the one where you can be. It can still be worth running the Intel version of QuPath on an Apple Silicon Mac, specifically if you work with Zeiss ZZI images. But for the rest of us, Alan's work on OpenSlide should have solved the problems of the Apple Silicon build. It's the one that I showed here in the demo, and it should be the main one for now. Okay. Yes, there's a question about, is it possible to minimize the script window? But the answer there is already given. So you can't minimize the script window. This is a kind of a JavaFX limitation because it has the main QuPath window as like the parent, which you can minimize. And then all of the other windows are like children of that. And so you can't minimize the child windows independently of the parent. But if QuPath didn't make them child windows, then they would keep falling behind the main QuPath one, and then they get lost and everything. So I find that was much more problematic. And so, yeah, you can't minimize the script window, and it's a JavaFX feature limitation that we can't really do much about that I can see. Okay. Are there any other questions? Sorry, I kept you slightly longer than planned, but if there are other questions, I'm around for a little bit, or otherwise we can meet in the forum. I should also perhaps say that because this was put together quite quickly and because I was also trying to make release candidate 2 and fix all the bugs, I haven't managed to catch any of the other presentations, so I don't know how people end these things, or if it just ends like this. But I hope to be able to watch some of the other presentations when they're on YouTube. Okay.